Welcome back to another edition of Corn Nation Radio. I am your host, Patrick Gerhardt, and with me today we have college football guru Alex Kirshner. As many of you know, Alex is a former SB Nation college football writer, currently co-host of the Split Zone Duo podcast, and has written for 538, Slate, and other periodicals. Alex is also a Pittsburgh native and has graciously agreed to come on today and talk with us about Pittsburgh football. More importantly, former Pitt offensive coordinator Mark Whipple, who has recently joined Scott Frost's staff at Nebraska. Alex, welcome to the show, and how are you today? Are you getting through the off season?
Getting through it. Thank you for having me.
Alex, if people at home don't know, why don't you give a little bit more background on kind of your connection to college football and, more importantly, Pittsburgh football?
Yeah, sure. So I've covered college football for just about my whole career now, which is about a decade of covering the sport. So not too long, but we get up there in years as we go. And I'm from Pittsburgh, so spend a bit of time reporting on Pitt over the years. Grew up a Pitt fan, Pitt family for sure, and have always kind of had a special place in my heart for the hometown team.
And you did not go to Pitt, though, correct?
No, I did not.
You went to Maryland, correct?
Yep. Go Terps.
Are you a big basketball fan then?
I've kind of opted out of the 2021 season for obvious reasons, but I have been known over the years to get pretty into Maryland basketball games. Yeah.
That's good. Maybe next year we can get you on for our college football segments college basketball segments. So anyway, Main reason why we had you on here, Scott Frost just hired on a new offensive coordinator, Mark Whipple from Pitt. He's known this last year for making a pretty prolific offense for them. And more importantly, with quarterback Kenny Pickett. What was Mark's tenure at Pitt like for the most part?
Yeah, it was an interesting run because he had a couple of years at Pitt where the offense was kind of a laggard, didn't do much despite having, a somewhat experienced quarterback in Kenny Pickett, who made an appearance at the very end of his, true freshman season when Pitt beat Miami in a game around Thanksgiving that you might remember from a couple of years ago. But then as he kind of went on in his career as a starting quarterback, going from 2018 through 2020, with Mark Whipple during that time, Pitt didn't do, I think Mark Whipple came aboard in 2019, I should say. Pitt didn't do a great deal offensively. They weren't much in 2019. 2020 was obviously a bizarre year because of the pre-vaccine stage of the pandemic. And then in 2021, everything that could have possibly clicked. And Pitt had one of the great offenses in college football. And Kenny Pickett was the Heisman finalist. And Jordan Addison, a wide receiver, won the Biletnikoff Award. And then everyone except for the wide receiver I just mentioned rolled right on out of town.
So how much of the success was personnel, or was it and how much was it coaching for the most part for Pitt?
I mean, I tend to always believe that the players are the most important piece in college football. I think that they are the reason why teams are good and the reason why teams have any kind of upside that they can fulfill. But Whipple did some good things. I think Whipple's staff did some good things in 2021. One of the things that I think was really notable about Pitt's offense last year was sort of the smoothness or the fluidity of their downfield passing game. It felt like their route concepts really worked and receivers were dragging defenders away from each other and creating throwing lanes for Pickett to put the ball into. So, I think for any good offense, it sort of has to be harmonious. And that was the case for Pitt in 2021.
Did you follow Mark's history before he came to Pitt this last turnaround? And if so, is there anything historically that he has done, especially when he was head coach, that you think probably evolved into what he's become today as an offensive coordinator?
He's had a long, interesting coaching career. I was a kid in Pittsburgh when Mark Whipple was an offensive assistant, when he was coaching quarterbacks, when Ben Roethlisberger was a rookie with the Steelers. Obviously, he's bounced around to a bunch of NFL jobs. He made the choice to try to coach football games at UMass a couple of different times, including as an FBS program from 2014 to 18. And that yielded the results that it was probably always going to yield, no matter who the quarterback was, no matter who the head coach was or the offensive coordinator was. So he's lived a pretty long football life, no question.
With his age, going on to his staff like Scott Frost, what kind of transition should Nebraska fans expect with him coming on board? And more importantly, what do you think he's going to do to the Nebraska offense?
Honestly, it's really hard to say until you get more of a sense of whose offense it really is. I know that's Scott Frost's side of the ball. I think at Pitt, because Pat Narduzzi, the head coach there, is very much a defense guy and is somewhat hands off with his offense. You probably had Mark Whipple's fingerprints pretty thoroughly on that offense for the last 3-4 years. I would expect that at Nebraska, it's a little bit more of a collaborative process just because, Scott has his offensive vision, has his identity. And until it gets sorted out exactly who has their hands on the buttons, I think it's hard to say exactly what Nebraska's offense will look like. But I guess for all of your sake, I would say I hope better.
No, I would fully agree with you on the last part. In terms of his quarterback development, what have you seen from the quarterbacks that he's had so far?
Well, I mean, it was Kenny Pickett at Pitt. It was just one quarterback all the way through. Mark Whipple didn't stick around for the Peach Bowl, which Kenny Pickett also didn't play in. So really, I think that Kenny Pickett may have missed a game at some point. I think he missed 1 or 2 games in 2020 with a bit of an injury. But, as far as Pitt's concerned, his quarterback track record is just Kenny Pickett. And what happened in 2021 was amazing. What changed between 2020 and 2021? Probably a number of things. Like I mentioned, I think that the passing concepts worked really well for Pitt last year. But also Kenny Pickett just worked really hard and became a much better player over an extended period of time. So it's interesting because really, as far as last 4 years goes, last 3 years that he's been at Pitt, it's one guy. That's, if you want Mark Whipple's track record at the position, you just look at Kenny Pickett, and that's the answer.
In terms of offensive philosophy, what does he really bring to Nebraska? At least that you've seen from watching Nebraska over the past few years and what Pitt has done this past year.
Yeah, it is different. I think that Mark Whipple is a more conventional, what used to be called pro style coach. Makes sense given his time in the NFL over the years, his various stops where he's coached drop back quarterbacks, and Kenny Pickett sort of fits that mold. I think the simplest thing is that it's a little bit different than the RPO based sort of modified option based deal that Scott Frost is known for. And that's why I think you'll get a pretty clear idea pretty early in the season, who is philosophically running the show on Nebraska's offense. How much control did Scott Frost cede? How much of it is still the head coach being involved? Things like that.
In regards to Mark's tenure at Pitt, what was it like for the most part? Were the fans fairly happy? I know a lot of Pittsburgh fans I know kind of did a 180 this past year. Were people surprised when he left?
No, I don't think people were surprised when he left at all. This was actually something that we had talked about on Split Zone Duo, it's our podcast, that, I think it was widely expected coming down the stretch that his time at Pitt had kind of run its course, irrespective of the good results that they had in 2021. Pitt fans are never happy, much like fans of a lot of teams. So I don't think that, despite the results of 2021, that people were overwhelmed with sadness. I think you expect that this is a high turnover industry and that these things happen, and before 2021, sure, there were plenty of Pitt fans who wanted him fired when the offense wasn't great. And that's just sort of the nature of the beast as well.
Doubling your pay doesn't help or doesn't hurt either for the most part. In regards to, it sounds like Mark has a fairly decent history coaching. He knows how to lead a team. He knows how to run a team because he's been a head coach. Scott Frost seems like he's had some growing pains over the past few years, transitioning from Central Florida to Nebraska, and he's had a fairly young staff in regards to age. and experience. Do you think Mark will bring enough to elevate Scott Frost's tenure at Nebraska, or do you think there will be more growing pains, especially because of the age difference?
It's really hard to reach conclusions about what age means for a coach. There have been plenty of examples of a young head coach and an older assistant having tremendous relationships and doing a lot of things very successfully together. And there have been plenty of examples of the opposite happening and of coaches not getting along. I think it's hard to draw definitive connections based on, the age gap between a coach and a coordinator. But I think that any offensive coordinator that you hire is going to have a significant hand in whether or not you score points. Nebraska's offense was, I think better than a lot of people nationally realized last year. And you just see how significantly things can improve. I mean, better than anybody that Nebraska was not, as far as the record shows, away from being a pretty decent team last year. So, you get, considerably better luck in one score games, and you refine some things on offense. You get a little bit more of a downfield passing game. And just because of kind of the bad luck that Nebraska had last year, you'd think that it doesn't take a ton. It doesn't even mean it has to be a genius hire for the team to be quite a bit better in 2022.
No, I would agree. And an offensive line that actually blocks will actually go a long ways this next year if that so happens. So no, thank you. I appreciate your input on that. We'll move on to the second subject of this podcast. It's something I asked all the national writers who come on here, and I hope you have fun with this. And that is, what is wrong with Nebraska football?
Well, I think that what is wrong is it's a question that depends on the scope that you're asking about. What's wrong in terms of why isn't Nebraska a national title contender the way that it was for many decades? The sport's changed. I think Nebraska fans know this. I don't think it's an irrational fan base by any stretch. Whether that, and this started many years ago, when the Big 12 formed and made it harder to get partial qualified players onto rosters, something that had been a really big deal for Nebraska. When other teams caught up in strength and conditioning and facilities, when scholarship limits and roster reforms over the years made the walk-on program a little bit less of a separator for Nebraska and other schools. All of that's changed, and I don't think that's ever going back. But what's wrong with Nebraska as far as why can't it win the Big Ten West or make a bowl game? That's a tougher one. That's a considerably tougher question. And I think if I knew the answer, I'd probably be a very well-paid consultant working with Scott Frost on fixing it. But I think that there's a lesson in it, and that's that there is no such thing as a slam dunk hire in this sport. Things can look perfect on paper, and then life can get in the way, and things can be a lot harder than you thought they'd be. So Nebraska's kind of been a case study in that. But I do think that, and I'm not just saying this because I'm on a Nebraska podcast, that they're not as far away from being a respectable Big Ten team as some weird sequencing made it look last year.
In regards to any major improvements you can see done within the football program, do you have any recommendations for what they could be or should be doing in the future to improve themselves?
Well, one thing that was very obvious was that last year the special teams were terrible. And that's one of the things that you noticed in the Big Ten. Obviously, it's a special teams league, or at least that's the joke. That's the reputation about it. Nebraska had a field goal game that was basically non-existent last year. That couldn't trust their kickers to do anything really from even inside 40 yards, let alone outside. Only a decent, kind of okay punting game. I think, and not much of a return game either. So I think that, you fix your special teams. That's pretty important. That's a phase of the game that can, especially when you're playing a lot of one-score games, make a pretty big difference in your final record. And hope that the Mark Whipple thing works out. It very well might.
Anything else you'd like to say on college football today?
No, thank you so much for having me.
Well, definitely. I try to get you in time. Again, this is Alex Kirshner of the Split Zone Duo podcast. Alex, why don't you give the people an idea of how they can follow you online?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're interested, you can find me on Twitter at Alex_Kirshner, Kirshner. And we'd love to have you try out Split Zone Duo. It's a national college football podcast. It publishes once a week in the off season and twice a week during the regular season. And that's just our free shows that anyone can get. If you go to splitzoneduo.com, we have about 3,200 subscribers, I should say, to a Patreon where we do multiple bonus episodes per week on a wide range of topics. Those are interviews, analysis, breakdowns of various things, history episodes, and we'd love to have you along. That's at splitzoneduo.com.
And as a Split Zone Duo Patreon subscriber, I would highly recommend anybody who follows college football to listen to it. All three of you guys do a phenomenal job. I think I've mentioned on this podcast before. Your recent one back, I think in January over Wyoming, was particularly interesting. And somebody who spent time in that area, especially for college, you guys were right on the mark on a lot of things. So I would highly recommend anybody to subscribe to the podcast. So,
well, thank you. That's obviously we talked a little bit about the famous tie between Wyoming and Nebraska in that episode. So
it was fun. No, you guys did a great job.
A Bob Devaney size tie. Yeah. Thank you.